Okay, so welcome everybody. My name's Ashley and I am the director of the Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness. And we're all here today to learn a little bit more about housing-based case management. Most of the people here are not new to case management, but new to the housing-based case management world that we've been using through the coalition for several years. So I want to talk about that. And then I want to talk to you guys briefly about what rapid rehousing is. Sounds like Cindy's going to train most of you, the youth folks who are here, on that tomorrow, but we can briefly go over that as well. So introductions, very briefly, we'll do that. I'll just kind of go over that. I don't want to waste a ton of time since most of you all work together in some capacity anyway. Briefly on what the coalition is, what we can help you with, and then we'll get into kind of the meat of this, which is what is housing first, what is housing-based case management, rapid rehousing, how you would structure a home visit, and then I'll give you some forms and tools to use. And every time I do this training, I need to say for kind of like liability reasons, this is all the work, or most of it anyway, is the work adapted from org code consulting. We didn't come up with this. We're not trademarking it in any way, and we're not saying that we came up with it. They did. We just implement it and then try to spread it across the coalition. So my information's up there. Again, like I said, my name's Ashley. I used to work for the Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency for several years. I was a housing-based case manager, a team lead, and then our program manager there for about 6 years. And then I've done this work on the west side of Chicago for 3 years prior to that. So quite a bit of experience doing in-home case management. So even if we don't touch on it today and something comes up weird later, feel free to reach out anytime and we can kind of talk through that. Now at the coalition, I'm directing and overseeing kind of our greater system work on ending homelessness and making sure those systems are in place in the service delivery world. All things ending homelessness across the 10-county region. And I think you guys, we have folks on from a different region as well. So did I get this right? We have attendees from NMCAA. So the NMCAA folks are doing rapid rehousing. We have maybe, I don't think anybody signed on yet, but Goodwill Family Street Outreach, who will be doing a little bit of housing-based case management, Staircase Youth Services, who will be getting, or be doing rapid rehousing for youth with a new HUD program, and then same thing for Youth Attention Center. Is that right? Take silence as a yes. I muted some of you guys on accident earlier. Okay. I don't know how to do that. So actually, I think I just muted one person. So if you guys want to stay on mute, totally fine. You can use the chat if you have any questions. If you want to come off mute and ask a question, do that too. So I don't like to just talk to myself the whole time. All right, so let's get into it. Very briefly, this is what the coalition is. We are serving 10 counties in Northwest Michigan to end homelessness. We're doing that through the Balance of State, which you guys are a part of, and then also through another continuum of care in the Greater Grand Traverse region. So 10 counties making up this large service area. This is a slide on kind of what we do and how we do it. we don't need to get real into that. Just wanted to make sure you all knew it's legit. We're a legit thing. Okay, so what we want to think about first in how we end homelessness and keep people housed, I think that's a good way to start this and kind of ground us there. Our work is to take people from the streets or shelters and place them in housing, and then you all come in to help them stay housed. The way we're going to do that, we'll talk about later, but the philosophy behind that is called Housing First. And what Housing First means it's really the belief that individuals experiencing homelessness should be assisted in accessing housing as quickly as possible, with supports delivered in the community in housing, not prior to housing. So the little person icon and what that narrative is really saying is, we're not going to put a bunch of preconditions on people to enter housing. So in the world of HUD, which is funding all of your programs, everybody that's here today, that's all funded by HUD. HUD makes the case for Housing First. And if you are doing things to go against that, so if you are making sure people are sober or employed or have graduated from some transitional housing program or are just nice to you, so if you're putting those conditions on folks to enter your program, that's not okay. And then that would be when we're not practicing from Housing First. Housing First means we believe that all people deserve housing. They need to get housing first, and then we'll work on all those other things. It's very hard for anyone to become sober living on the street. My friend Ryan has been doing street outreach for, I think, over 20 years. He has never seen someone get sober on the street and maintain it. Not to say it can't happen, but it's very unlikely when people are focused on survival to be able to achieve goals beyond that. But once they're housed, we can start movement and reducing movement towards goals after folks are being housed. So ways to maintain fidelity around and making sure we're practicing from a Housing First approach would be to do these things. In our old case management office at NMCA, we had this slide kind of blown up and put around the office. And just as like a friendly reminder that these are kind of the rules we live by if we're practicing Housing First in rapid rehousing. So just like to hit on a few key points here, we want to make sure that the services are delivered in the person's home whenever possible. So there's reasons behind that. During COVID, we can talk about how you might do that in a safe way, making sure you have PPE, doing medical screening and all of that prior to your visit. But we're going to pretend for today's sake that we live in a COVID-free world. But yeah, I can help you walk through that stuff if you need more support around that. But we do want to do this work in home. We want to make sure people have an individualized service plan. Another key thing is if people lose their housing, they don't lose their program and they don't lose their supports. That's one of the things that people ask the most when we're doing trainings like this. So let's say you house someone on your rapid rehousing program, they get evicted 2 months in. Okay, you just need to find them another place. It doesn't mean that they lose your program. Now, if they're violating program rules, if they're violating agreements, which are very dependent on your agency and your program, but typically we want to make those as low barrier as possible. So in however many years I've been doing this, we've never, well, I wouldn't say never, we've probably terminated 2 people from an actual program. People have been evicted, I can't even count how many times, but they didn't lose their program. that just means we need to rehouse them somewhere else. And I know it's not that simple, especially if people continue to get evicted time and time again. But we need to make sure that people, just because they face an eviction, don't completely lose you all as their program support. We want to make sure that we have caseloads that don't exceed 20 for Housing First. That just means, I wish they would have not called it Housing First, but for our permanent supportive housing acuity folks, so the people with the highest needs, we want to make sure you're not having a caseload over 20 and then not over 35 for rapid rehousing. I am going to venture to say that we don't have that problem because we don't have that many program slots. But you want to make sure that you're able to deliver the level of service that people need. And then also that our intention is not to heal or fix people. We're walking alongside people. We are not, it's not our job to coerce people into behaving a certain way. We're walking alongside them through this kind of journey of change. And you can read the rest of that on your own. So some more Housing First stuff. Really have to hammer this home. Things that are not Housing First would be an orientation toward emergencies and complete crisis-driven work. So we've found, and there's been studies done, that when you engage people around when they're in a crisis, and that's the only experience they have of you, the maintenance of engagement and doing that long term dramatically drops off. So we want to, it's okay. I'm not saying ignore people who are in a crisis, but when we really want to see long-term stability in housing, it shouldn't always be crisis oriented. We want to make sure that there's a place for that, and they have other supports around a crisis that aren't you. Because then you'll kind of see over time, you'll never be able to get progress on kind of these lengthy goals because the work is just constantly crisis driven. So we want to make sure there's other supports in place for that. We know that everyone is ready for housing. Now, I will say that 2 years ago, before in Traverse City, we put in these same types of programs for young people for the very first time in our community, I would have said that there's really no place for transitional housing. And I was wrong. There is a place, I believe, in the youth space for some level of transitional housing. However, we don't want a blanket statement that every single young person is not ready for housing until they graduate something else. I think there's kind of this sliver of folks in our communities that might need more help, but that rapid rehousing could be appropriate for them as well. It just depends on the person. And then we want to make sure our program is heavy with housing services, not emergency services all the time. We already talked about that. And you want to make sure you have few rules or requirements for accessing the housing and support. So if somebody is just rude or, you think will not be compliant, that doesn't mean that we can't serve them. That just means, right, we're going to adjust how we serve them. And I believe this is all already set up, at least in the 10-county region and probably in the other areas as well, to go through the coordinated entry system. And when things are going through the coordinated entry system, we know that it's going to be equitable and accessible for everyone. So these are phases of the process from homelessness to housing. And this is kind of a good guide to just like a high level overview of how you're going to kind of roll out your program. So Cindy, this might be a good one for you or like management staff. So first, we're going to make sure we have the eligibility, screening, and acuity information. So that first block is really talking about knowing what your target population is. Are you using the TAY? Is it going through coordinated entry? How is your program going to get referrals to that? Is there a by name list process? All of that good stuff. Making sure that that's ready to go. You want to make sure there's an informed consent process in place and a desire to participate in the program. No one has to go into this program also. So, and that goes for any rapid rehousing program. Just because it's offered doesn't mean people have to go into it. So we want to make sure there's a process around letting them know what the program looks like, and that they are signing off and saying, yeah, I do want to be part of this housing program. Being document ready is kind of that next step, and that can kind of go hand in hand with the first box. So that would be really determining in your community who is doing the street outreach work. So who's doing the identification of the young people, and then who's getting them document ready to be in the program. And really for this, document ready means having a verification of homelessness. And at least in the 10-county region here, we're all familiar with that. But that would be working with your HARA or your coordinated entry lead to determine that. Then phase 2 begins, which is after you have identified people that will go into the program, making sure they're eligible and document ready, we're going to go find them housing. So who's going to do that part? Next comes lease up, move in, progressive engagement. I'm sure you guys all know kind of how to do that. If you're, got somebody from Goodwill entering, I just want to let them know. Doing progressive engagement, knowing that this work takes time, doing coaching along the way, and then finally with rapid rehousing, the goal would be greater independence, and folks actually graduating off of the rapid rehousing program and going into programming that they might need, like permanent supportive housing. That's sometimes rare, especially for young people, or a housing choice voucher, or just housing on their own. So that's just kind of the overview of how this will all work. Just gonna pause for like 1 second if anybody did have a question they wanted to put in the chat, or come off of mute. If not, we'll keep going, but I just want to pause and make sure people have time.
Ashley?
Yeah.
Of course, I would want to talk, you know. So when you were talking about document ready, it's my understanding that if we're approached by people and are doing the outreach, and we could then, as long as we are talking with centralized intake, we're going to be doing the TAE, making sure they have all the certifications and all that kind of thing. And then we will work with each of our prospective HARAs to get them on their prioritization list, correct?
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure that was.
Yep. And then I think we kind of talked about that before. It just depends on who is going to be doing the outreach. If you're going to have like the HARA street outreach team doing that, fine, they can do the verification of homelessness, or you guys can.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
As long as there is one.
Right.
Yep. Okay. And Veronica and Demetria, it looks like you guys just joined us. Welcome. The only thing that you've missed that would probably be important to know is that a lot of the folks on the call today are youth providers who are getting a youth rapid rehousing project. And so they're learning all the things about what that looks like. So Veronica and Demetria are family street outreach workers in Greater Grand Traverse who are also helping us roll out some rapid rehousing. So just wanted to get them involved. And then, like I said, guys, if you want to use the chat, go ahead. If you just want to come off mute and have a question, that's fine too. Yep. Okay, so doing a quick, I don't want to go too much into what rapid rehousing is, but I think it's helpful since everyone here is in some way a rapid rehousing provider. It's a solution to homelessness designed for individuals and families to quickly exit homelessness and return to permanent housing. It's offered without preconditions, going back to that housing first approach. So we're not going to make people have income, employment, be sober, have no criminal record, that sort of thing. Now, what I want to clarify there, though, is that's to enter the program. That's not to enter housing. So there's fair housing laws and all of that good stuff, but a landlord can require a criminal background check and still be a participant in the rapid rehousing program as a landlord. It's really talking about you as the agency or the provider not requiring these sort of things. Now, if you think, if you're working with landlords who are saying, I mean, right, there's fair housing laws outside of that I'm not going to go there with, but you as a provider can't require these things to run an effective rapid rehousing program. But that is not to say that the landlord might not have other types of requirements. So it's really finding landlords that will work with you. And I'm sure that, well, most of you anyway are going to be hooked up with your HARA, who have hopefully been doing that work for a long time and can help you find landlords for your program. We're not going to watch this today in the interest of time, but when I send these out, this is actually a video. And it's a great video to, Cindy, I don't know, we've used it to show board members, like just a quick, I think it's 3 minutes on like what rapid rehousing is, and then we don't have to keep explaining it all the time. So that's a good short snippet for that. And then this rapid rehousing toolkit, I might have already sent you, but it's just more, it's a link to more information on it. Whoops, and it's gonna play, hang on. Nope, all right. So really, oops, sorry, let me go back here. There's 3 core components of rapid rehousing, and that's what we're gonna get into before we go into how to actually do the case management. Rapid rehousing exists, or I'm sorry, within rapid rehousing, there's housing identification, there's move-in and like rental assistance, and then case management. So in the housing identification piece of a rapid rehousing program, we want to think about recruitment of landlords, addressing barriers that landlords might have to entering housing, and then assist the households to find and secure. Oops, let me admit Rita's coming in. Assisting landlords, or I'm sorry, program participants to actually secure the housing. So in a perfect world that I've never been in, we would have this huge backlog of all these landlords who want to work with your program, who are already educated on the process, and who you can just call as soon as you get a program participant and say, hey man, I got this person, can we come over and check out your unit? Do you have one available? Sure. And then the person has a choice whether or not to take that unit. To be really dedicated to a housing first model, we're giving tenants choices of units. So again, in this perfect world that I've never lived in, we have 4 or 5 units that we can take someone to, and they actually have a choice around where they live. Sometimes what that looks like, and it's very common and very unfortunate, is, do you want this unit or do you want to stay homeless? So I just want to put that out there, that that is not the right way to do things. That's just how reality is often in our communities. It's a choice of, do you want this unit or no unit? And if it's no unit, it's okay, we'll keep working with you to find another unit. Again, just because we're not going to exit someone from a program because they get evicted from their unit or because they don't want a particular unit we offer them. we just need to find something else that better meets their needs. The other thing I'll say about rapid rehousing rollout is you guys don't, you as the rapid rehousing case manager might not be the ones doing all of this. You might be, I don't know. Across the system, sometimes systems have people doing this work. Sometimes it's the rapid rehousing case manager. In the Greater Grand Traverse region, it is either the rapid rehousing case manager or the street outreach worker kind of doing the landlord recruitment and getting them into the program. So it depends on what it looks like in your area. All right, so the next core component of rapid rehousing is rent and move-in assistance. And so this is just, so you paying for the unit. Sorry, Rita's having some connection issues. Keep letting her in. So at a minimum, the rental assistance should be enough to help people secure a place to live. At the maximum, rapid rehousing can go up to 24 months. Okay, so it's literally from security deposit is like the minimum all the way to 24 months of rental assistance and case management is kind of the range. So depending on your program, depending on the people you're serving, that can look different, but that's what it can be used for. Depending on how your funding is structured, you can pay for other things, but we're not going to get into that right now. We want to really stick around security deposit, moving in, and then rental assistance after that. All right, and then when you get into the final
Ashley?
thing, which is, oh yeah.
So I
Yes.
specifically write this in my proposal, but can I pay for, how there's an apartment fee sometimes for an application fee?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's going to come out of your, I believe, I'd have to look at the reg, but I believe it's going to come out of your support service line item.
Okay.
And it might not, I can't remember where that lives, but in that really big document I sent you, it's like 70 pages, it's in there.
Okay.
So it'd either be under rental assistance, and if it's not there, look up into support services.
Okay.
But yeah, you can pay like application fees.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so case management. Very briefly, what rapid rehousing case management, is looking like is connecting people to like these essential services that they need. What it looks like for young people is very different than this. It's inclusive of these things, but it's also all the other things that young people need and that you guys are all experts on. So I'm not gonna do that part. You guys serving young people are the experts in how to make things youth focused. This is really just kind of the overall homeless case management services. We're talking about connecting people to things in order to increase their income, increase their benefits, and increase their connection to permanent connections outside of you. So community, neighbors, other support networks outside of you as the case manager are kind of the three pillars of rapid rehousing case management. But like I said, that can change when you're serving young people or other very vulnerable populations of people. So like for chronically homeless folks, if we're using rapid rehousing as a bridge to something else, it's going to look a little bit different. But true rapid rehousing is focusing on those three main pillars. So now we're going to get into what it looks like to be a really good housing-based case manager. The description we've used for years at NMCAA is somebody who's trained and professional in the work. We are kind of rooted in a trauma-informed practice, and everything we're doing is rooted there. We're housing focused, and that's going to come up throughout this. That we have professional boundaries with our clients, and that it's documented, planned, that's spelled wrong, and sequential. So it's kind of a process. Case management is documented, planned, and sequential. It's not super rigid, but it's not a very informal process either. And so that's why we really want to make sure everyone's trained, and housing focused is the other big one there. What housing-based case management is not, and I will say again, this can vary depending on the population you're serving. Sometimes with young people or very vulnerable people, it is a crisis service, but where we just want to be careful is that it's not always or not only a crisis service, because then, like I said before, we'll find that when we get to the end of a program, no one's really ready to graduate off of the rapid rehousing program because we've been focused in crisis for so long. So we really want to make sure we're working on goals in addition to addressing crises if they come up. We want to make sure we're doing things not doing things for clients, that we're doing things with them. Again, when we're talking about very vulnerable populations, we can do some things for them, but over time, phasing that out gradually. We don't want to have this be a dependent relationship or a friendship, right? Professional boundaries, all that good stuff. And then we always know it's a destination. It's not a destination, it's a process. It's going to evolve over time. Likely, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And it's not without conflict. If you have people that are really compliant with everything you say and are just, oh my God, achieving great goals from day one, then you can kind of look at this and say, ooh, are we serving the right people? Because potentially they could have figured that out on their own. Now, some people in a rapid rehousing program will need very little assistance, and that's fine. But if we see that constantly, we just need to look at our system and make sure there's not all these other people that we're not serving. Hopefully that makes sense. So once you're matched with a program participant, meaning you've gone through kind of phase one of that block model that we showed, you want to ask the person what case management supports would look like to them. So does that mean, what does that mean to them? And then talk about that. For rapid rehousing programs, ask them what they think the least amount of assistance is that they will think they'll need. So that's kind of a key thing to think about with rapid rehousing. We've always trained case managers at NMCA to really go through like that empowerment focused approach to it. So not telling people, hey man, you've got a 24-month program, on the 25th month, we're just gonna cut you off and figure it out on your own. It's not that. So we're not really even talking to them about this goes on for 24 months. We are always saying, what is the least amount of assistance do you think that you will need? And then kind of sticking with that, not saying if they say 2 months and they really need 10 that we're going to cut them off, but empowering them to really meet that goal. And what will it look like for you? You said 2 months. Okay, what's that going to look like in 2 months? What are the things that you need to do to be able to maintain this housing on your own? We want to make sure people in the very beginning are comfortable with you coming into their home. Again, that could look very different right now. And so I'm not going to get totally into that right now, but we want to make sure that they know that we're going to be coming into their house. And if they're not comfortable, what does that look like? We've had to ease into that with people over the years. Right away, they weren't comfortable with us. So we would meet in public a couple times and then go into the home, and then maybe meet in the entryway, and then we go into the living room. And so it's again, just a gradual process. We need to make sure that people know our primary focus will be on housing stability, that we're not to say that we don't care about all the other things happening in people's lives, but our focus really needs to be on how is this affecting your housing? How can we keep you housed? It's very easy to get in the weeds of the chaos of people's lives. And when you find yourself doing that, what we've told our case managers in the past is look to kind of outsource the other stuff. Is it therapy? Is it counseling services? Is it mediation services? What is it, supported employment? Who else can kind of handle that stuff so we can focus on the housing? We need to talk about in the very beginning with folks what housing search will look like. You want to make sure that the program participants know if they should be looking for the housing or if you are going to be looking for the housing. So if it's their responsibility to come to you with housing leads, fine. If they can handle it, that's going to depend on the person. But what does that look like? Do they know how much they're looking for? What bedroom size that they're eligible for, the price they're eligible for, all of that stuff if they're going to be doing it. If you're going to be doing it, that's fine, but just have that conversation. And then a huge thing, ask them what they think it means to be a responsible tenant. What would it look like for them to be really successful in housing? And if they've done that before, how can they replicate that? All right, I'm going to do another pause, see if there's questions. I'm probably talking a lot about stuff you guys already know, but okay, no questions, we'll move on. Okay, so moving in. For housing to be considered, and again, well, no, we're all talking HUD rapid rehousing. It does depend, these things do change depending on the funding source sometimes of the program. But for HUD rapid rehousing, these are all true. You need to do a housing quality standards inspection. And again, as I said here, it depends on the program what inspection is required. I've talked with Cindy about that. And then for Goodwill folks, we partner with NMCAA to do that work here. And Staircase, you guys can do that as well. So
Hey,
figuring
Ashley,
that out ahead of time. Yes.
I went on Michigan's, on Mishta's webpage and has the HQS page. It was like a two and a half page now.
Oh, the inspection form?
Yeah, housing quality standard form. Do you know? I was like, because when I used to do them, they were like 8 pages long.
Well, the one, I'm wondering if you're looking at habitability.
Oh.
Because there's two, the one on Mishta, the one that I've always seen on Mishta's website is for ESG, and they don't make you do like an
This is habitability. You're right.
That.
I knew that was too
so
easy.
Adam can send you it. Yeah,
okay.
That one's way easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can't use that for this, but Adam will give you the form.
Okay.
For HQS. Yeah, it's lengthy.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? So you need a lease to be in place for HUD rapid rehousing. So, Cindy, will you mute? I can hear something.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I don't know what's in the background. So for HUD rapid rehousing, for the first year, it needs to be at least a year lease, and then depends on your specific program, but you have to have a lease in place, and that's all in those regulations. So look at the regs before you take my complete word on it. The housing has to be permanent. We don't want to put people in places where we know the lease is going to be up in 2 months. Needs to be permanent. Client has to have privacy and control access to the unit. So HUD rapid rehousing programs do allow for like a room for rent situation. If you want to know how to do that, let me know and we'll get you some more guidelines around that. It gets a little bit trickier when we do room for rent, but sometimes that's what young people want, and sometimes that's a lot easier to find. Sometimes it's harder, but it just depends. But you can do that on HUD programs. They just have to be able to kind of control access to their unit. Sorry, I'm getting feedback again. There. Veronica, I muted you. Sorry. We're getting some feedback. And then the unit has to either meet fair market rent or rent reasonableness. Terms depend on the program and what you guys have kind of decided. And I've talked with Cindy already about that. So she'll let you know what you're going to do. All right, so more about moving in. In the very beginning, you want to make sure you're defining your program role with the tenant and with the landlord. So it's very important that we're talking with the landlord about what your role is, how and why to contact you. So that's kind of up to your scope of work, Cindy, that you want folks to be doing. We've done it different over the years. We've done it where we kind of offer the program and sell it to the landlord as, you can call me, so you don't have to constantly call the tenant. If there's an issue, call me first. I'll talk about it with the tenant, and you can kind of be that middleman or liaison, not the mini landlord though. So it's not, you aren't ever going to be the ones writing eviction notices. You might be there if a person is being evicted to help support them and figure out what the next step is. But you know, there's still things that a landlord is going to do outside of your role. Want to make sure that the in-home services are depending on acuity and need. So not everybody across the board needs to be served in the same way. We have folks on our rapid rehousing programs at NMCA. Some receive case management support in their home every single day. Some receive it once a month. And usually that tapers off over time. That every single day is maybe for young people in the very beginning. And then that goes to, 3 times a week, twice a week, once every other week. It can gradually taper off. But you want to make sure that you have the capacity to do it as much as needed outside of like living there with the person and offering constant supervision and support, because that's a different program. So you want to make sure the landlord knows also when you're talking about how to contact you, why to contact you. You want to make sure the landlord knows what you're going to be able to share with them. So another thing that's just a helpful tip is that we've had a release of information as part of kind of our intake packet into the rapid rehousing program, where it's very specifically calling out what you will be able to share with the landlord and what you won't be able to share with the landlord, because they're going to ask you all sorts of things about the tenant, and you have no obligation to tell them unless the client has signed a release. And then you really want to emphasize that you're here to work to mediate issues, that likely this process won't be perfect, but you're there for added support. So these are just some best practice tips for housing folks. We only want to do move-ins typically on Mondays, Tuesdays, or Wednesdays, we do that so that people are not without support over an entire weekend. And some days, like if you house somebody on Thursday, you were busy all day Friday, they're going 3 or 4 days with no contact, unless you guys do have on-call or after-hours support, and that's totally different. But if we're operating in this 9 to 5 world, you only want to do move-ins Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, where that case managers can follow up with them the next day and likely one more day before they'd be without support for a couple days. This doesn't, again, in this perfect world, you'd have all these people to move in all the time, but usually we only want to do one move in per day. It's just a very hectic, chaotic process that you are there with them throughout. So housing-based case management is actually being there at move-in, setting them up in home, being at the lease signing process, doing all that stuff with them and supporting them along the way. And like I said, it's very time intensive and all consuming, so you don't want to add a bunch of those all in one day. If there's a lot of anxiety around moving in, discuss and role play the move in before it happens. And again, that's a pretty clinical-ish way of doing it. Maybe even a conversation around what are things that you think could go wrong in the first couple days of housing, and how can we work through that and talk about that before you even move in. And so that's been a helpful tip that we've done as well. We want to make sure that not all the furniture, but all the basic furniture is picked out in advance. Don't want to house somebody, especially coming from the streets, without a bed. That's huge, huge, huge. Making sure that they have a bed when they move in, and that night they are sleeping in a bed if they choose. Now, we've also had people that it took them 3 months we had one lady set up a tent outside of her unit for a few months until it got cold enough. She'd spend time in her apartment, but was just so entrenched in street living that it took her a really long time to transition to coming into housing. So we went from tent outside to tent inside to take down the tent. Now we're in a sleeping bag. Now we're in the bed, like 6 months, 9 months later. Okay, so again, gradual process depending on level of acuity of the folks you're going to be serving. But you definitely want to make sure that they have a bed. Moving costs are also, Cindy, in that line item somewhere, and I think it's in supportive services, but if you need to pay somebody to help somebody move, that is a line item in these grants as well. When you're looking at the units, you want to make sure that you aren't the one looking at the unit for somebody and making the decision on, yes, they'll go there. Now, if you have like a bunch lined up and you just want to do the inspection first to make sure it's okay before you show somebody, that's okay. But we don't want to do it where you are saying yes to a unit without the person choosing to live there. And then you want to be there at the lease signing process. I always tried as a case manager to be there in person with the landlord and the tenant, thoroughly going over that lease. They have to do that. Landlords have to do that, and sometimes they'll breeze through that, but especially with young people who may have never signed a lease before, it's so critical that you're there and you're able to ask questions and the participants able to ask questions as well. So on the day of actually moving in, we want to do a walkthrough of the unit, assist client in completing a damage assessment. You can just Google that and find all sorts of them. If you're just implementing a program, is this the most important thing in the world? Probably not, but it has been helpful, and it saved the client some damage fees in the past. So just a helpful tip. You want to review building orientation and fire safety with the client. That's a huge thing for young people. we've done that in our youth program where we've actually had, now this is at a facility type, we have 14 units at a building, so I don't think that's going to be the case here, but if you are housing somebody in like the housing commission building, for example, you do want to go over fire safety. We've had the fire department come out to the 14 unit complex that well, it's a 60 unit complex that we have here. I don't know that that level is needed, but for young people, like what would you do if there's a fire? Who do you call? That sort of thing. Helpful to go over. Huge thing, making sure locks and keys work and figuring out what they're going to do when they lose their keys. It's not if, guys, it's when. And it doesn't matter, young or old, the keys are always gone. And so what's that going to look like? We've had our young people in this 14 unit development have key fobs, so not even like an actual key that they're turning, they just had a fob, and very expensive to replace, and hundreds of dollars we ran up in the first month losing those things. So that's a little bit unique, but like I said, it doesn't matter, young or old, everybody loses their keys. Figure out what it's going to be like when it happens, and who they're going to call, what if they don't have a phone on them, all of that sort of thing. And then we'll talk about the crisis plan later. More about the lease signing. Yeah, especially with young people, like we make copies of them and then like we're marking them up. We're highlighting if there's areas of the lease that don't make sense to young people, because a lot of them are like boilerplate leases with legal jargon that nobody understands. It's helpful to just say, okay, what does this actually mean? Because again, people are not going to be probably evicted from your program, but they could run the risk of being evicted from their housing. So how do we comply with the lease? And that's another way. We're always asking, how do you think this might impact your housing? And then we can always come back to the lease. So you aren't being the bad guy all the time, but we're saying, well, is this in compliance with the lease? Like, let's just check it out. Yeah. These are org codes, helpful tips on promoting homemaking. I will say I have not done all of these. Like, I've never made cookies, but I'm sure that's probably a really helpful thing to do. Just like the smell of that triggers like this memory for people of like, oh, this is my home. And that's going to be huge. Not as much with young people that we've seen, but for older folks who have spent many years on the streets, thinking about a place as their home takes a really long time. And so ways that we have seen it be really helpful is like a plant. So something else to take care of, another reason to kind of get up that's not a pet. I'm not even going to go there with the pets. That's always a thing. But providing them with a plant is like a good alternative to a pet. Giving them picture frames. I will say though, we've done that, and then it kind of triggered this thing of like, well, I don't have any pictures. I don't have any people to put in my frames. So that's kind of one where you want to make sure that that exists before you prompt that one. Getting tape or sticky putty stuff to put stuff on the walls, doing that with them. Grocery shopping with folks is huge. Our case managers do spend a lot of time doing that with people. Where that gets tricky is, are you just providing the ride, right? We want to make sure that there's always skill building around maintaining housing. Are you grocery shopping with them to help them learn how to budget or how to make meals, make them last? Maybe they've never been grocery shopping. That has happened a lot with our young people. So just making sure that there's always skill building attached to housing maintenance. This, making sure that they have some structure to their day, and if they don't, what are some things that you can help them get that will address boredom, because when folks are bored, that's when we're getting into probably not helpful activities all the time for wellness. But also when we think about people experiencing mental illness, having like a radio or a TV or something as background noise is really helpful. So making sure you can set that up for them. Calendar is huge. We bought calendars in bulk when we started our rapid rehousing programs and gave them to all of our clients. Fridge magnets, dry erase marker. We then just went to this dry erase calendar. For all of our clients, that's also a magnet. So we got a 3-in-1, but that's been really helpful for the youth in appointment setting and things like that. So setting the tone for productive home visits. When we're going into people's homes, we do want them and you to be comfortable. So I'm going to address safety a little bit. I don't have a slide around safety, which I probably should. We do that more. I don't necessarily address safety always in the housing-based case management training. I allow the agencies to address that. So like at NMCAA, we had kind of a safety plan outside of this. But it just depends on the agency. A couple things I will say about safety and going into people's homes. I've been doing this for over 10 years now. One time in all of that time have I felt like I've been in a truly unsafe situation where I needed to think, okay, start thinking about how you're going to get out of here. And one time in 10 years. Not to say that it will never happen, but it is pretty rare, especially if you're building a really solid relationship with people. Likely that's not going to come up. Now, what does come up a lot is other people, not necessarily usually the client, but other people in the home doing unsafe things or making it unsafe. So what I always ask people to do is try to set the tone in the beginning that a bunch of people are not going to be allowed at your home visit. The scenario comes up a lot where if we house one person who has been pretty street entrenched and on the streets for many years, they get housed and 14 other people from the streets come with them. And so that's not helpful. So we try to make sure there's not a lot of guests during the visits. Now, if they have mom or dad staying with them, they're off in their a different room, they're not being disruptive, that's a different story. But you want to try to really limit most guests during your scheduled home visits. I always asked for TV, radio, whatever to be turned off, not necessarily like this rigid robotic thing. So you're going to feel what's natural to you. I always had kind of like a space in everybody's house that we would sit and have our meeting. So I knew at Cindy's house, she had chronic back pain. She wanted to sit in her chair. So I would always pull up a chair next to her in her living room. And then over time, she would eventually know that the TV had to be off, phone had to be off, that sort of thing. And we could really work on what we needed to work on. Again, you're building the relationship over time that gets more comfortable over time. Now with Joe, he liked to walk around the whole time, really agitated. So we would just kind of stand in his kitchen and that's what we would do. So again, really tailoring it to what your client needs and what they're comfortable with, but trying to make it as structured as you can. You want to make sure you're on time, that we're not like hanging out with clients, that there's always kind of a reason to be there. If you start feeling like home visits are just becoming this, hey, what's up? How are you? Good. How are you? And it's not productive, maybe we need to think about, kind of two scenarios. You can think about why that's happening. And if sometimes they're at a different place now, they don't need you as much. So let's taper off the visits a little bit. Sometimes something else is going on and we need to dig a little bit to figure it out. But again, all dependent on the client need. just kind of counseling techniques, right? It's okay if there's silence. It's okay that there's awkward pauses. It's okay to acknowledge, I know this may be hard for you. Um, Also, okay, maybe not right in the beginning, but after the relationship has been built a little bit, um, noting discrepancies and establishing an honest environment. So the example we use there is, and that's another great thing about being in home. So maybe one of the things they keep saying they want to work on after their house is being sober and their sobriety. But every time you go over to their home, there's 10 other people there passed out drunk. Okay, and that's okay to kind of acknowledge that stuff in a helpful way, right? So saying, I'm wondering how easy it is for you to maintain your sobriety when there's all these people here partying all the time. And then they can kind of talk through that. So those are just some counseling, motivational interviewing type techniques that are helpful in this work as well. Let's see where we are on time. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit faster. More tips for productive home visits. We're not there to provide advice or telling them what to do, right? We're walking alongside of them. Again, I like to have home visits like a little bit structured. So I like to think about it as the first few minutes, you're just kind of grounding with the client. Hey, how are you? You're doing some check-ins. There's maybe a little bit of like chit chat stuff. And then we say, okay, where would you like to sit today to really focus on what we're going to work on? And then we go there and they kind of begin to think of that space as this is where we're going to work. And then we start going over the goals and the progress and what we need to work on and establish what that day we want to accomplish, and what kind of what progress they've made in the since the previous visit. Okay, so here's that structure. Again, you don't have to be this robotic about it, but hey, what's up? Basically, we have about however long. I like to structure a home visit right around like 45 minutes. Sometimes if you're going to do, like, let's say you're going to do a food stamp application with a client, that might take a little bit longer to get internet and go through all the stuff, whatever. But I like to keep them around 45 minutes. So you want to say, like, last time we talked about these things. What would you like to talk about today? Really not also setting like 10 goals per visit. And sometimes you go into a visit and you think, oh yeah, we're going to do this application and then we're going to learn how to make chili or I don't know, whatever. And then they come at you with just all this other stuff, right? So then we pivot and then we try to address the goals that we know need to be addressed, while still acknowledging that there might be something else going on with folks. So at the end of every home visit, these are the things you want to do. You want to make sure that you summarized what was discussed and what was accomplished during the visit. Establish objectives for what you are going to do, what the client's going to do between visits. Establish the I can't say that word today, objectives for the next visit. And then here's where that sweet little calendar you got them on their fridge comes into play. Note on the calendar the next date and time of your visit. So you want to leave every visit scheduling the next visit. You don't want to leave that open-ended. I'm guessing there's probably some scenarios where you have to, but we want this to be like future-oriented and very goal-driven. So setting that time is key. And then every single time, try to find something positive to acknowledge. Maybe it's the plant that you got them that they've kept alive another day. Maybe they cleaned up the dishes, maybe whatever it is, finding that one thing to keep the positive momentum. And then this slide is before you leave. You're not going to do this like every single time. This was meant for before you leave for the first time. So we've moved in. Now this is the thing you're going to do, kind of like that first night they'd be on their own. And again, you can do this. We talked about doing this way before becoming housed, asking them things that might go wrong in the first few days and help them plan for what they'll do if they happen. And then sometimes, I don't like to put a number on this one all the time, but ask them things that they were great at the last time they had successful housing. Likely, with young people, sometimes they haven't had it on their own yet. So it's, again, being future oriented. What are three things you want to be really good at to help you be successful in housing? So again, this isn't every time, this is more the first time. And then this thing that I kind of became famous for saying at my previous agency was, how will this impact their housing? So in case review, as a team lead, I'm constantly asking case managers, how is this impacting somebody's housing? All right, so that we're getting way in the weeds on all the areas of somebody's life, that if we think about how is this impacting their housing, and if it's not, okay, that doesn't mean it's not important, but we're going to try to outsource that to somebody else. And we're going to help them through that process. But we know that we can't be all things to all people. We're the housing-based case manager. There are other folks in the community that we can help link people to do other things. So we're always asking that. And then you start asking yourself that, like, what does this have to do with housing?
So real quick, I feel like a lot of what I do currently, because this will be a new program for us, is that crisis. Like, with my teens that I work with now, we get caught up in crises all the time. I am the crisis person. And so I'm curious on how to connect with other supports that way, because I just kind of feel like that's who we are. We are the crisis people. But if it's supposed to change, I don't know,
Well,
it's just a new thing.
Yeah, like how much, Dakota, is the crisis driven around being homeless though? So like if somebody was housed, would some of that go away or no?
Well, maybe housed in this way, because right now I use host homes, and that in itself, can get rocky, and then you're looking for new housing. I just feel, because we set goals and we try to work on these goals, but it's, especially when my youth are in their first jobs or they're starting college, I just feel like there's always like a crisis that's happening, and they usually do call me, and I just don't see who else I could outsource that to in our area.
Sure, and sometimes you can't. So I think really what we're thinking about here is crisis, like my apartment is flooding. Like, don't call me about that, right? Like, call whoever, the landlord type thing. Or crisis. Now, you guys are doing a dual role, though. You are, because you are the like youth provider. Typically, that's not the case. So typically, like NMCA, we'd be doing this. And then if a young person was in a NMCAA program and they needed youth crisis counseling, we'd send them to you, right? So like you are kind of doing that dual role. So yeah, it is going to be a little bit tougher for you guys, but I think what would be important to think about is how much can other people take on? Like, you don't want to be so much the crisis worker that the place is on fire. And we've had this happen, and they're calling you. And I'm like, call 911. Do not tell me that. Like, by the time I do anything, the thing's going to be burnt down. So, yeah, that's kind of why we put that in there. So just being clear. And there's this form I'll show you in a second called a crisis plan. And they actually get to write down what they think crises are. And then you can write down like, okay, call me about that one, call this person about that one. So it gets a little bit more specific. But yeah, you guys are a dual role.
I Dakota, I think that we have to just be clear that their crisis is not always our crisis, and they don't necessarily, I mean, we have to set limits on that, you know, if it feels like a crisis right now, but it really could wait till tomorrow morning.
Right.
And making that clear for people.
Mm-hmm. Great point.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're gonna skip this one in the interest of time. Okay, so the first month of housing, I do want to be really clear. So if you guys are new to the bringing people from the streets right into housing, the abnormal is pretty normal. So likely there's going to be this honeymoon period followed by a more intense need for supports. And a lot of that is rooted in this like desire to please somebody or act like folks are deserving of housing. And that's just like inherent in this system, unfortunately. And then when that goes away, you know, it hits the fan. So what also happens is while you're building the relationship, people aren't always honest about their behaviors or what goes on in housing for them. But over time, because you're in the housing pretty frequently, you'll see it and things will come to light, and usually more need is evident than what was in the very beginning. A lot of times we see this a lot with young people trying to like sabotage the housing with supports, doing a lot of that like self-sabotage work, and we know that's coming from a place of trauma and all of that, so we know where it's coming from, but it still doesn't always make it easy when you see somebody doing it time and time again. But the great part about that is if we're dedicated to housing first, even if they're self-sabotaging, they're not losing their program. They might be evicted from their housing, and we don't want that to happen either. But you guys are still there as the program support. So the 5 necessary functions the first month of housing would be to do this crisis plan that I'll show you, do a budget, your first case plan. We're not going to go there today, but there's a full version of the SPDAT that goes along with this, and then doing a personal guest policy. So you have all, I'm sure you're all clinical providers. You've all done a case plan before. The difference with this crisis plan is that it should be completed pretty quickly when you get into housing. Like I wouldn't say do this at day 29 of the first month. I would say do this within the first week. Sometimes that can't happen, so 2 weeks. It's a fluid document. You want to update it as necessary. And then the final time you update this is at the program exit. So basically you're doing the crisis plan once, and then as needed, you don't do this every 30 days or something. You can review it every 30 days, but you'll do this once at the beginning and then once at the end. Again, when you have this, you'll be able to zoom in and kind of see what it looks like. These are org code forms, so you have to pay for these. So I can't release the actual like form for you, but this is what it looks like, and you can make that up as you see fit. So what we really focus on here is this middle part. So it says emergency medical. I think we might have even taken that off. You want to put you as the support worker there. And then what I like to put next to support worker are the reasons you would call your support worker, not because the apartment's flooding, right? And then we've also tailored this form to have the landlord or 24-hour maintenance person in there too. This form was initially from org code made to be very like mental health driven, and so we just, to make it more housing focused, we put landlord in there, and then I think we might have even added the column that says when you're going to call these people. So yeah, what else was on here I wanted to call out? Oh, and then another just tool for you to use is the right side. So the signs that people are about to go into crisis, helping them recognize that. And you can even change the wording there. It doesn't have to be crisis. It could be things that I would normally call you about, like how do we have a conversation around calling other people and not, not taking on the crisis all the time. So just a helpful tool. Honest monthly budget. Again, I'm sure you guys will come up with your own budget. This is the org code one. People either really like this or they really hate it. And so, and I don't mean program participants, I mean service providers, because of the right-hand side, right? So it's called an honest monthly budget for a reason. You're going to ask them all the things they actually spend money on and call those out and be okay with it when they say, I spend 75% of my income on drugs and alcohol. Okay, let's write it down. At least we know, right? And how do we budget for that? And all the informal ways people get money. And being really honest about that. Again, this changes over time as the relationship builds. We worked with somebody for probably 2 years before they told us they were doing sex work to get money. And so like day one, they didn't say, yeah, I'm prostituting myself to have money to do X, Y, and Z thing. It was 2 years later that when we were redoing this annual budget or monthly budget or whatever it was, that the relationship was there enough for her to be honest around doing that. And then we can, work on that if she wants to. But really, if you look at the left side, if that's kind of where you're at now and more comfortable with really just what are the things that they're responsible for. Another great thing is to tie the budget right back to the lease. What in the lease are they going to have to pay for? Do they have to pay for trash or water or whatever utilities, that sort of thing, making sure there's mechanisms to do that if all that stuff's not included. And then the key thing, when they lose their keys, not if, but when, how much is it, where does that fall into this? And then your first case plan. You guys know how to do case plans. You're all clinical folks. I'm not going to go way into this. But for your housing case plan, you want to make sure all the things are related to housing stability. And you can pretty much tie most things back to it. And I can't right at the moment think of something that would be where you couldn't do that. But yeah, you want to always be asking, how does this goal impact your housing? The SPDAT, the only thing I'll say here, and maybe this is just more for Cindy, the SPDAT is another full training that you can go through. It's the full version of the TAE. So it's the version of the TAE that is not just self-report. It's the clinician doing an assessment of the program participant with their input, but being scored more based on the clinician observation, not just self-report by the client. And it's really helpful to guide case planning. So later down the road, I can do that as well. But let's implement stuff first, but just heads up, I can train you guys on that too. Okay, and then the last thing we'll talk about, and it's super important, I probably shouldn't have put it as the last, but it's the personal guest policy. So with the times that this comes up the most that we've seen over the years are with youth and with chronically homeless adults. When I said you take one person into housing from the streets and 10 come with them typically, that's not uncommon, and that's also not uncommon for young people to do the same thing. And so it's okay, right, to have friends over. Everyone who's ever been a young person is, well, we all have, right? Everyone's been a young person. who's been housed on their own as a young person, I guess I should say, knows that social, emotional stuff is really important. And it's really important to have community and friends and all of that stuff over. It's when people are breaking the lease in order to do that. So again, always coming back to the lease. And this should really be done in the first couple of weeks that they're in housing. Really a conversation around what time of day do you want people here? Are there people that are definitely not allowed in your unit? And if there are, what are you going to do when they show up here and want to stay here? This becomes pretty hard to tackle, but a pretty common issue in the winter when people don't have access, or when people can't like stay outside anymore. Camping's not an option. Maybe shelters are full. Maybe they can't go to a shelter. What are the program participants going to do when folks are up at their door in the middle of winter and say, hey, can I stay here? And maybe it's okay for them in their lease to have people stay there. I don't know, but you always want to be going back to the lease. I would say outside of severe mental health issues, guests are the number one reason why people get evicted. So it's so important. And it doesn't even have to be other homeless people. It's just people, or formerly homeless people. It's people that they just let into their house and do illegal things and cause issues, and you name it, it happens. So this is why this one is so critical. And really talking through that with people, not being punitive and saying, these people can't come here, I'm going to kick them out. Not that. It's helping them walk through the process. What happens when this does happen? What are you going to say to Joe when he has to leave? How are you going to call the police? Are you comfortable calling the police? All that sort of stuff. And then finally, I wanted to leave you guys with something that you can tailor for your program around exiting, because we haven't talked a ton about when people go off of the program, but eventually, because this is not a forever program, they'll all exit at some point. And so this is some exit planning tools to use. Sometimes it's relevant, sometimes it's not. To do the form, but to have this conversation, it's really always useful. Like, we have this conversation every single time somebody exits. Do we write it all down like this every time? No. But we want to make sure that people have mechanisms there to pay our rent, or to pay their rent. What will happen if they can't pay their rent? Who will they go to? What tools can they use that they've learned? What are things that they're still working on? How are they going to keep working on it? How will they know that their housing is becoming unstable? And what will they do? Huge one. And then this is more, we don't always do this one with the clients, but it's something that you guys can kind of think about. Are people ready to kind of graduate the program outside of, can they pay for it by themselves? What supports will they still need? And these are just kind of the real basics. You'll, after doing this work for a while, come up with your own. But yeah, these are kind of the basics around maintaining housing that you can check off. And then we're done, right on time. Some more resources. So the National Alliance to End Homelessness, tons of resources around rapid rehousing. Org Code Consulting, their website is good. There's some free stuff on there, and that's where I would suggest going. I can't remember which ones are free and not of those forms, and I don't want to get into like a lawsuit thing, so just go on their website and see if any of those forms are available for free, because some of them are. Like, I think the budget is. And then if you want to know more, just kind of the history of rapid rehousing and why it's a thing and all of that good stuff, HUD put out a rapid rehousing white paper or brief, and that's linked in here too. And then any questions, any support, anything I can offer, always feel free to reach out, and Cindy knows my email as well. So that's in there. And that's it. God, that was a lot of talking. Does anybody have like final burning questions? Or Cindy, do you have anything else you want me to touch on?
No, I think it was really good. I think it will help us to focus planning our programs and getting things off the ground. So I want to thank you very much.
Of course,
And
of course. And I'll have
you did it in perfect time.
I know, I can't believe that. It's literally never happened.
You didn't go to the bathroom the whole time.
No, no, I didn't bring my computer. Forget I was on Zoom going to the bathroom. Yeah, I'll try to get this recording somewhere that you can access it. It never works to send it, but I'll try to get it like on our YouTube channel or something and send that out too if you have other staff along the way that come on and would want to use it.
Awesome.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for listening today. And like I said, reach out if you need anything, and I will send the slides to this invite list that I have, so you all at least have that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ash.
All right, thanks guys. Have a good night.